All right, guys, welcome to MycoSymbiosis. Really happy to be participating in the Mushroom City Arts Festival once again, and I hope you all enjoy this presentation. Start out with a little bit of humor, you feel me? And we'll get on. So, like, a big part of mycosymbiosis is learning to become symbiotic with the local mushrooms in your area, whether that be foraging or cultivating. So, we're going to talk about a little bit of cultivation first, and then we'll get into a little bit of foraging. I think it's really important to become symbiotic with the fungi in your local area as they are contributing a lot to the functions of the ecosystem, and working in harmony with them and developing a language or developing a better understanding of them could help um, expedite the ecological regeneration that they're already doing. And it can also bring a lot of health and wealth to you, your family, and your community. Um, so when dealing with mushrooms, especially with foraging, it's important to understand a little bit of the biology of the mushrooms. Um, so many of us already know, as we've already been interested in mushrooms, a little bit of the morphological features that we'll see with mushrooms. And as far as cultivation goes, this all will come in more handy when cultivating mushrooms outdoors, so that you know that you're cultivating the right species of mushrooms that you intended to. Um, yeah. So a little bit about how mushrooms grow, just kind of giving us a platform to work off of as we continue with this talk here. Mushrooms produce spores. There's a lot of different methods of them doing this. For the most part, we work with Basidiomycetes. Myself, I do a lot of work with Ascomycetes, particularly cordyceps mushrooms, which also produce spores and have a little bit of a different mechanism for doing so. Once the spores are produced, two spores will combine, sometimes more, exchanging their genetics and starting to grow out into mycelium, which eventually will eat through a substrate, whether that's a living tree, a dead tree, soil, manure, all sorts of organic debris and detritus. Once they either run out of food or become oversaturated or experience some sort of environmental shock, they will begin to produce mushrooms. So I do teach a lot of classes. Some of the classes are actually entitled MycoSymbiosis. And we do hands-on classes whenever it's feasible to do so, as all of us know this year hasn't been, where I educate individuals on how they can become more symbiotic with fungal life around them and kind of create more fungal life around them. We work with a lot of different methods of cultivation, both indoor cultivation and outdoor cultivation, utilizing materials that are accessible to most people, whether or not you live in a city or in an urban setting or in a rural setting. And we also cover lab work, which is not entirely necessary if you want to begin to start working with fungi. It's not entirely necessary to know the lab skills, but if you do want to develop to the stage of spawn production or producing your own substrates, or if you want to expand into more research and citizen science, it is a little bit important that you start to learn some basic lab technique. So we'll talk a little bit about the process of cultivation. First, you're going to want to obtain a culture. So obtaining a culture can look a few different ways. We could work with clones, we could work with spores, or we could work with culture distributors. So a lot of people that aren't going to go the route of setting up a lab to begin their journey, you'll probably be working with more culture distributors that are distributing spawn. If you do end up working with a lab, you might start working with culture distributors that are distributing Petri dishes and liquid cultures and things of that nature. Spore work, to me, is more something that you're going to be working with if you're looking to breed specific traits out of gourmet medicinal fungi, or even non-gourmet or medicinal fungi that you're utilizing for other reasons, may it be textile or, um, building materials or anything like that. Clones, I do work with a lot, and you don't necessarily need a lab to make clones. You can make clones with simple techniques utilizing cardboard, and there's plenty of videos online. I even have some videos online on my YouTube channel, Apex Grower, where you could learn about these different techniques. So yeah, this is what the cultures look like when you're working with clone or spore. We typically work with agar Petri dishes to get our cultures growing. And it's just a nutritive substrate for you to grow out your mycelium, grow out your fungus on. And the mycelium is very alchemical in nature in the sense that it can be broken apart and recombined with itself. Each cell has enough information to grow a whole new culture out. So when you break off small pieces, they can all grow out, and they can also reconnect with the with itself from a different piece. I distribute cultures through my website, mycoshop.net, in these syringes, and this is what it'll look like if you purchase liquid cultures from different distributors. Liquid culture is quickly becoming the go-to method of propagating mycelium for most mushroom cultivators at this point. It's easy to work with. It's very clean. You don't need a lab to expand on liquid culture, so it's very feasible for a lot of individuals. This is what my lab looks like. This lab is integral to my mycosymbiosis, and it's weird to say my in a system such as this, like identifying self in a kind of selfless system. But this is where I do a lot of the research with cordyceps mushrooms, and I intend to do more research with other fungi. This lab is equipped for microbiology and molecular biology, so I have been getting very interested in studying DNA over the past year. And I think that this will be fruitful for yielding more understanding of the fungi that are in our systems and how they're working with each other or what they're actually doing. And I know some of you guys are looking at the lab stuff like, oh, no, that's not for me. And that's okay, because as I mentioned to begin with, you don't necessarily need a lab. If you do want to start getting into research, or you do want to start getting into culturing, you can do something as simple as use a Sterilite box with holes cut into it. And this is very effective. But again, this isn't something that's entirely necessary to develop mycosymbiosis. So we'll get into foraging later, which can be completely done without too many tools or inputs or anything like that. I use coconut water-based agar in my lab. Very easy to access. Almost anybody can get these two things if you live near a city or in the urban area, or you can just order them online. I always just go to the Asia Mall, get some of this Telephone brand agar, and then get a couple liters of coconut water, which I mix 1 liter of coconut water to 25 grams of agar powder. And then we have the dishes. There are glass Petri dishes for people that do not want to waste the plastic, and you could also use glass jars, glass ball jars, cur jars, anything like that. They'll work as well. We'll talk a little bit about substrate prep and expansion here. So one thing that you want to keep in mind when working with fungi is that even though they produce fleshy macro bodies, fungal bodies, mushrooms, they are a microorganism, and there are a lot of microorganism competitors. So you're going to want to make sure that you keep things sanitized and you keep things clean when you're working to cultivate mushrooms. We utilize pressure cookers and pressure sterilizers to sterilize material that we're going to feed the mushrooms. We also use low pressure pasteurization barrels, which is a topic in its own that I don't necessarily want to delve into. I definitely recommend people thoroughly research this, or maybe visit somebody that is operating one of these before trying them themselves. Just a couple notes as far as that goes to get anybody started that's interested. For the low pressure pasteurization, you're going to want a 33 or 55 gallon steel drum, non-galvanized and food grade. You want it to be food grade. Make sure there wasn't any chemicals or anything like that in it before. And never, ever, ever put the clasp on the lid. We also do pasteurization methods, which are a little bit easier. You can do hydrated lime overnight, 12 to 24 hours, and the hydrated lime will spike the pH. We're typically doing this with wood chips or straw. It has been successfully done with sawdust pellets, wood pellets. You can also do a fermentation where you submerge your material for 3 to 5 days, whether it's straw or sawdust. You submerge it in water. Where all the organisms will become anaerobic, and then whenever you take it out, they become aerobic, and you have a small window to inoculate without contamination, without a high risk of contamination. We also work with a lot of grains for preparing different cultures to be expanded onto more bulk substrates like sawdust or straw. I try to utilize local grains if possible. I live in a fairly rural state, so this might be a little bit easier for me. But occasionally we'll use feed grains, for animals, like oats and things like that. Whatever is affordable, but keeping in the mind of like becoming symbiotic, it is important to support local systems in doing so. And be mindful of where you're sourcing your materials. We then move into local sawdust from the grain that I procure from a sawmill near me that is milling hardwoods. We always make sure that we're cultivating with hardwood sawdust. And I don't know if I mentioned, but we mostly cultivate native strains, or I mostly cultivate native strains here when I do cultivate gourmet mushrooms, native strains that have been found out in the wild. Occasionally, whenever I'm doing bulk production, I will switch over to commercial genetics to produce larger yields. But I do think it's an interesting movement, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be developing our own commercial genetics from native strains to just keep everything local, keep everything symbiotic. So yeah, once we have our substrate prepared, we introduced our grains that contain our mushroom culture, let those expand. I do occasionally take my junk mail and waste paper from the house and grow mycelium out on that, which I will then introduce into wood chip piles outside. To grow mushrooms outdoors, and also get rid of all this excess paper waste so that it's not being thrown in the trash or thrown in the recycling for somebody else to deal with. I think it's important for us to be responsible for our inputs and outputs. Then we get myceliated, let the mycelium grow through your substrate. And once it's fully grown out, there's a lot of things you can do with it from there. You can either produce mushrooms or you can continue to expand it onto more substrate almost indefinitely. Then we'll get to this fruiting stage before we get over on into the foraging stage. Outdoor is really interesting. This is a really cool picture. I was traveling to go meet a friend to go foraging, and I saw these mushrooms growing out on the side of the road. And I slowed my car down. I used to have a sticker on the back of my car that said I break for mushrooms, but the police didn't necessarily like that one. So I definitely took that off. But this was really cool. It looked like some people pushed a bunch of wood chips off to the side of the road, and there was a lot of native Stropharia rugosa annulata growing on it. That is the garden giant mushroom or the wine cap mushroom. And I was like, hey, it's already growing in my area. They're pretty big. Some of these were torso-sized mushrooms. So I figured I would take that and clone it and then cultivate it in my own systems. And you can clone these mushrooms simply by breaking off a piece of the stem butt that was in the ground, and breaking that up and rolling it up into wet cardboard, which can then be ripped up after the mycelium has grown through it and expanded onto more paper material or expanded out into wood chips if you have enough. We've done some integrated myco remediation projects. This was at Urban Edge Farm in Lancaster. where they grow medicinal herbs. And at the top of the farm, there is a slope. And at the top of that slope, there is a road. And they wanted to make sure that no contaminants from the road were spilling down into where they're cultivating their medicinal herbs. So what they did there is they built these berms, which were then backfilled with mushroom spawn, spent spawn from other local mushroom farmers. That spawn was then able to accumulate or filter out any potential contaminants that were coming down from the street. So whenever you're utilizing mushrooms in this manner, they're not necessarily mushrooms you want to eat. You can test them to make sure that they are safe and don't contain any harmful compounds. But ideally, you just let it ride out and utilize it to serve its function as a filter. And then you can just test the runoff or test the soil at the bottom to see if there's any contaminants in it. Then it's good to do tests before and to do tests after, but this can be in a very effective manner or a very effective way of remediating contamination. So wood chips, mycosymbiosis is not only about the mushrooms, but thinking like a mushroom in the way that we manage our resources to make sure that the way that we're managing our resources isn't detrimental. And I see wood chips as a huge resource that oftentimes gets thrown into large piles, which then break down, could potentially off gas, methane and things like that, especially whenever there's a lot of leaves in the mix. So what we do, there's a really cool website called Chip Drop that I utilize. You can sign up. I think they're all around the country, all around the United States. And you can sign up and say, hey, whenever you guys have any hardwood wood chips, please drop them off at this address. And then one day you'll get a phone call and somebody will say, hey, tomorrow I'm going to drop off all these wood chips at this address. So I've gotten tons of wood chips dropped off, tons of stump grindings, which I then introduce various mushroom strains into. And I also incorporate some of these wood chips into my sawdust substrate, especially when I'm growing reishi, because wood chips and reishi substrate help to form stronger bases on the mushrooms. But yeah, then we just take these wood chips and we turn it into food, feed it to people, turn it into medicine, create different food as medicine products with it, so a great way to manage local resource. We also do log cultivation. I've been working with the Horn Farm for a couple of years doing cultivation classes where we've been using Ailanthus logs to cultivate mushrooms. And this is really interesting because Ailanthus is like a weed tree, so to speak. And a lot of people don't want them on their property. And I think it's really beneficial for mushroom cultivation because it's a soft wood. So you'll oftentimes see mushrooms producing off of it faster than you would on other hardwoods. It helps get rid of the weed tree, so to speak. Some of my friends have done some work with inoculating the stumps of the Ailanthus after it's been cut down, because when you cut down an Ailanthus tree, it can send shoots back up from the roots. So cutting down the Ailanthus tree and then inoculating it with oyster mushroom substrate to actually kill the root system so it doesn't continue to produce more trees. So that could be something that's beneficial as well. You can see my friend Rusty here going through the process of inoculation where we drill holes into the logs, introduce a sawdust substrate utilizing the specialized plunger tools to fill up with the substrate and introduce into the logs. They come out like that right into the holes that you drilled. And then we cover it with either wax or clay. I'm pretty partial to clay just because it's always available. If I do forget the wax, you can just dig a hole and utilize clay that's in the ground there. So there are a couple different methods of cultivating on logs. I really like these integrated outdoor systems, especially if you have some land. Mushrooms are a great way to go about integrating food forest type systems. And if you are starting to develop food forest type systems, you can always cultivate specific tree species to encourage the type of mycorrhizal growth that you want to see in the forest, and maybe produce an environment that's capable of producing chanterelles or morels or porcinis or something of that nature. On the left, we have a totem style method, which we typically do for larger diameter logs where they're sliced into discs and the mycelium is introduced in between those discs. A paper bag is put over top of it, like a lawn bag you can get from a Home Depot or like a Lowe's or something like that, to maintain moisture as the mycelium is growing through. Then eventually the log will be stuck together and it will start producing mushrooms, beautiful mushrooms. Here's some shiitake that I used to have in my backyard. I always love having the mushrooms close to me. I can just go out and pick them fresh in the morning and, you know, cook them up with my eggs, or pick them fresh in the evening and cook them up with my dinner. And I think there's something very nourishing about having mushrooms accessible to you like that. Here we have oysters growing in a totem method, and I think this method is really interesting because of its ease. It's utilizing discs of cardboard that have the mycelium growing on them and sliding them in between discs of logs instead of utilizing like a sawdust spawn or something like that. And that works very effectively and can be done with minimal effort, minimal money, and super low tech. I've also been very interested in this like Asian style cultivation of burying mycelium, whether it's spawn blocks on sawdust or burying logs with some sort of aggregate underneath it, be it like sand or rocks. And then the mushrooms will actually begin producing up out of the ground, which is really cool. I've been working on integrating mushrooms into a lot of garden systems as well, trying to recreate natural systems. And a lot of people, when I did this garden, said I wouldn't be able to cultivate healthy crops in wood chips. A lot of people said that they would be nitrogen deficient, but as you can see in the picture, they aren't nitrogen deficient. And this is because the Stropharia mushrooms that I inoculated into the wood chips are breaking down the wood chips fast enough that the plants are able to access the nutrients, and is creating soil rapidly underneath the wood chips. And these were the Stropharia mushrooms. They'll grow underneath the plants as the plants provide shade for them and retain moisture. Beautiful mushrooms, and they're super delicious. We have some golden oysters here. I did get a little bit of like pushback whenever people saw that I was cultivating golden oysters outside because they are non-native, but they have naturalized here in Pennsylvania. I do not think that it's really a big deal as they are already naturalized, and you know, they're going to be out there performing the same ecological function as most other mushrooms out there in breaking down detritus. So here are some of the golden oysters that were cultivated unintentionally, actually. We just, as I was cultivating a lot of golden oysters in my indoor system a couple years ago, we took the spent spawn blocks and broke them up and introduced them into my friend's garden where he grows potatoes and sweet potatoes. And he continued to add wood chips and coffee grounds and things like that. And as he continued to add more organic material, these mushrooms continued to produce out of the organic material there. And they're very beautiful, and especially when they get a little bit of sunlight, they get a lot more golden than yellow as they do in an indoor system. Here's another raft method or burial method utilizing logs to produce the myco mushrooms. You can see my friend Rusty here is covering them up with some sawdust as well. And then they're producing beautiful Nemeko mushrooms right out of the ground there. Pretty awesome system there, pretty awesome method of cultivation. And then we have passive cultivation. You know, every year there are more and more mushroom farmers popping up, and that means more and more spawn that's available. And a lot of times the spent spawn that comes out of these mushroom farms isn't necessarily spent. If you do put it outside in outdoor systems and let it get rained on or spray with the hose, they can continue to produce mushrooms like this big king oyster mushroom that we got a couple years ago, growing passively out of some spent spawn blocks. And here we have another buried mushroom log system. This is with Ganoderma Ling, the Asian reishi with the yellow pores. And this one was buried with aggregate underneath. Logs were buried, and it was at the confluence of two springs, so the ground stayed particularly moist. And then it was covered with a shade cloth, and we can see an abundance of reishi mushrooms growing here. This was at my friend's farm in Brevard, North Carolina. So I really would love to see more of these kinds of systems developed and utilized here in North America. We'll get a little bit in through indoor mushroom cultivation as well. I oftentimes teach these classes and end up with lots of mushrooms like in cups and little plastic bags, as I do like hands-on little workshop situations with people in my classes. And I always hold on to the spawn bags that we make just to ensure that that they're working and that the mycelium is growing out healthy. And occasionally I'll find random mushrooms just growing around my house. And that will happen as you start to develop a relationship with mushrooms in this way. Occasionally you will just find mushrooms just growing around in your house, outside of your house, everywhere really. Here we have a small indoor grow setup that I did last year in a shed. This worked out really well. We put weatherproof paint on the floor to block out the moisture so it didn't damage the floor. Put up plastic to maintain humidity and also protect the wooden walls from the humidity. Was able to grow quite a lot of beautiful mushrooms in this small shed. You know, as I mentioned, they can provide health and they can also provide wealth. So I've definitely owe a lot of my income over the past 8 years to mushroom cultivation and foraging. And this guy right here has been a great customer throughout the years. This is one of my favorite chefs, Chef Kurt, here in central Pennsylvania. You can see he's super blissed out with all those lion's manes that I brought for him. And I've really been interested in cultivating more difficult to cultivate type mushrooms like this Maitake here. I had been purchasing commercial spawn from Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, to experiment with this, as I know that they hold really good genetics over there. And I was able to cultivate these, and this was some of the most rewarding and beautiful mushrooms that I've ever cultivated. And I think once I start to get back into cultivating gourmets this year, moving into 2021, I think I'll be playing around with a lot more Maitake. It's just so beautiful. So this is what it started out like, you know, as people start to delve into this journey. I mean, I know a lot of you guys will just be foraging and like working with outdoor stuff, but for those of you that are working with indoor and are on a budget, I understand. I've been there. When I started cultivating mushrooms, I was working as a server in a restaurant and I had a young child, so I didn't really have much funds to put into it. But don't let that stop you. What I did is I worked with what I had. I started growing mushrooms on these rope ladders with paracord, as I could get hundreds and hundreds of feet of this paracord for the same price as one of these shelving units, and was able to cultivate more mushrooms on there. And as the mushrooms grew, I was able to sell them and reinvest that money back into the mushroom system. So there's a lot of ways to let the mushrooms pay for themselves, and eventually they'll provide you with wealth as well. So you can see some of these mushrooms that I used to grow. This is probably like 5 years ago. And eventually I expanded into a larger gourmet mushroom setup where I was producing 200 to 300 pounds of mostly oyster mushrooms each week, which was a lot of fun. You know, it's also a lot of work. So definitely think about that before you decide which avenue you want to take into the world of mycosymbiosis. This was last spring, you know, harvesting a lot of blue oyster mushrooms, harvesting a lot of greens, watercress, spirulina, things like that. So just as mushrooms work with other organisms in nature, whenever you integrate them into your own systems, I think it's important to also think about the other organisms that they will be in a relationship with, whether the relationship is just on your plate. So definitely think about that. Oh, this is a really cool picture. This is from my friend's farm up in Albany, New York. They collect coffee grounds from the city, and they introduce oyster spawn into totes and buckets and things like that. With those coffee grounds, and just produce mushrooms outside like this. And I think it's a really beautiful system. We have some indoor golden oysters. This is the almond agaricus, and this one was cultivated on a block of finished hot compost. So if anybody does any hot composting, once you have finished, nice, beautiful hot compost, you can inoculate it with various agaricus mushroom spawn and actually cultivate them outdoors, which is pretty cool. We have some piopinos, some Ganoderma, lots of beautiful mushrooms that you can develop relationships with. So we'll get into a little bit of bioprospecting or foraging. I always like to think of foraging as bioprospecting because I'm always out there looking for new genetics. We'll leave you guys with that for a moment here, and we'll continue. So known cultivatable wild mushrooms. We have the Hericium genus mushrooms. In my hand here, we have Hericium coralloides, which is really interesting because a lot of us know about the erinacines and hericinones in Hericium erinaceus, or the lion's mane mushroom, that have the neurological regenerative properties. But not as many people know about the corallosin compounds, which are species-specific unique compounds found in Hericium coralloides. So that's the corallosins A, B, and C, which also have neurological regenerative properties different than the erinacines and hericinones found in Hericium erinaceus. So super cool. This is a large Hericium erinaceus that grows usually in November in my area, and I think the largest I ever found it was like 12 pounds, but I know some people have found some like 20 plus pounds single Hericium erinaceus before. So it'd be really interesting to see if in integrated outdoor systems, because only once have I seen somebody produce a massive lion's mane indoors. But it'd be really interesting to see if we could introduce some different methods of cultivation for outdoor Hericium erinaceus and see if we can't get them super massive like this. So this is where I find it, in the nook of this hackberry tree that's covered in poison ivy. So it's perfect for me to get because I don't get poison ivy. So I know that nobody else is going to go out there and swipe that Hericium. And this is Hericium americanum. I don't necessarily know about any species-specific unique compounds found in this Hericium, but this one can also be cultivated. And I love how it just looks like cascading waterfalls. Beautiful, beautiful mushroom. They all have slight subtle taste variations, but very similar texture. Here we have Volvariella bombicina. This one can be cultivated. I don't know anybody that's cultivating this, so I think this would be an interesting one to play around with and cultivate. And this one typically is found on maple trees. I personally haven't eaten this one, but it is an edible species of mushroom. Here we have Zygus Ulmerius. This is the elm oyster mushroom, and as you can tell, it has a stem. So don't be fooled by the large amount of individuals online who are selling Zygus Ulmerius and actually selling a Plurotus, but naming it Zygus Ulmerius online. Beautiful mushroom, can be cultivated, and super tasty edible. Now we have the Plurotus Complex. There's a lot of different types of oyster mushrooms, and we mostly call them Plurotus ostriatus or ostreatus, but I do believe that there is a variation in a lot of these. And we have Psilocybe ovoideosis didiata, edible and psychoactive, and it is easily cultivated on wood chips. So as we start to see more decriminalization of psychedelic plants and mushrooms around the country, I really hope that this is one that will catch the eye of individuals in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, as it already grows in the wild around here. And there's been some interesting research through individuals, which probably should not be named, that this mushroom can help fight off honey mushroom infections on trees. So this fungus is very, very aggressive. It creates soil faster than most wood chip loving mushrooms. So aside from it being psychoactive, I think there's some really cool ecological roles that we could study alongside this mushroom and its mycelium, or this mycelium and its mushrooms. Here we have, oh geez, I always forget the name of this. This one's the olive oysterling. And this one's an edible species that is not commonly cultivated, but I do know Field and Forest does sell this culture to be cultivated. And it is a winter, like cold weather loving mushroom. So I think it holds a place in a perpetual production system for when the weather starts to shift like this, and like enoki mushrooms would go good for cold weather cultivation. But yeah, this is Pinellus serotinus. I had to actually look that one up. I always forget the name for that one. Here we have Glavifomes graveolens, under researched, potentially very medicinal mushroom, and it can be cultivated. My friends over at Mush Love Mushrooms were able to cultivate these. So I would like to see more research done with these mushrooms, and potentially add another cultivar to our lists of cultivated mushrooms that we're working with. Fomes betulina, a great anti-parasitic mushroom, and it can be cultivated as well on birch sawdust or on birch logs. But it does produce in abundance in a lot of places around North America. So I don't know. It's always fun to cultivate, but it is also very easy to find in the wild. Here we have Ganoderma Sessile, the stemless reishi. This one is native here in Pennsylvania and other states in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest. A beautiful North American species of Ganoderma, which could be easily cultivated and contains beneficial medicinal compounds. Beefsteak mushrooms, Fistulina hepatica. These have been getting a lot more interest this year as our friends over at Garden State Mushrooms have been working on cultivating these and have had some successes in producing fruit bodies in culture. Sporaceous mushrooms have been cultivated in Asia. Super delicious mushroom, and I think that figuring out cultivation would be amazing because oftentimes in the wild there'll be a lot of sticks and leaves and things like that growing through here. So if we can be able to cultivate these in an indoor setting where they're not covered in insect frass and leaves and sticks, I think that'd be super amazing. So a lot of potentials here for you guys to get out and research cultivation techniques and figure out how to cultivate something that isn't readily cultivated here in the United States. You see my little boy there with some harvest that he had before school last year. Grifola frondosa, we're in the perfect season for this right now. They're starting to produce, so hopefully we get some rain around here and we can get a lot of these going this year, because last year was not good for these. But they do produce in abundance. Nobody should be going hungry in the fall when there's hundreds and hundreds of pounds of these mushrooms just growing everywhere, all through Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, and New England states. So there is an abundance of these, and we should be getting them to the masses and getting those onto people's plates. And here we could see a large harvest that my friend Michael Weiss and I were able to procure in under 4 hours, and I think this is over 100 pounds, just two of us. So again, there's no reason anybody should be going hungry this time of year, especially when there's an abundance of this delicious, nutritious food out in the forest. Here we have naturalized shiitake. These were found around Fairview, North Carolina, which was one of the first places that had any record of shiitake naturalizing and going rogue or feral out in the wild. And they produce large shiitake mushrooms on entire oak trees out in the forest out there. Here we have Lepista nuda or Clatosabe nuda. I can't remember what the genus is right now. But this is a detritus-loving mushroom. It loves leaf litter and pine mulch. And can be easily cultivated in our systems, utilized to create soil and also produce these beautiful purple mushrooms. I mean, they're so stunning. To be able to just have that in your cornucopia of fall foods to eat, I think is just stunning to me. And here we have Flamilina Veludapes, another cold weather mushroom that we're going to be producing towards the end of the year. This is known as the winter mushroom because it is found in the later months of the year, and sometimes will be found after frost and even popping up through snow. Delicious mushroom. This one is found in Asian markets as long, strandy, white mushrooms, but in the wild or whenever it's exposed to light and fresh air, they'll have short stems and very brown caps. Truffles are a really interesting thing. I was able to go out and forage truffles with my friend Sunny, I think 2 years ago now. With Stella and Sunny. and Stella is the dog, and they go out there and find all sorts of truffles in the Pacific Northwest. But it's very interesting, and there's been a lot of research over the past decade on cultivating truffles with lots of success here in Pennsylvania and Virginia and Maryland. We have individuals now planting trees, and with about a 7-year turnaround on truffle production. But after the first 7 years, then the trees will continue to produce truffles for the lifespan of the tree. So truffle cultivation is something really interesting to look into for individuals that are developing food forests or growing their out farms and things like that. Here we have pecan truffles. This is something that grows in the South in pecan orchards. And a lot of times you don't even have to inoculate these. If you're growing pecans, they're probably already growing there if you're growing pecans in some abundance. Super tasty, very aromatic, delicious gourmet truffle. This one's kind of funny, but also not funny because the legal system sucks. But yeah, morel cultivation is a little bit difficult, but can be done. And I also think that it's important to just plant trees that would encourage morel production. More non-cultivatable or not yet cultivatable, but delicious mushrooms. But we have seen people cultivating various Lady Porsche species over the past decade. Few and far between, but it can be done. So I think this is really interesting. And this one does produce in abundance, and another reason why nobody should be going hungry when you can find hundreds of pounds of these mushrooms in a single day. Cantharellus and Craterellus mushrooms, super delicious. I think I'm reaching the end of my time here. I don't want to really go past an hour, so I'm going to kind of finish up here for you guys. But loads of different Cantharellus mushrooms, and I do really encourage anybody that is working on developing food forests to plant trees that would be helpful for encouraging the mycorrhizal associations that would produce delicious mushrooms like this. We have Hiddenum species, or the hedgehog mushrooms, Craterellus venosus, Cantharellus phallax, or Craterellus phallax, the black trumpets. This one's interesting, Echinoderma resinosum. This one tastes like skirt steak, and it's saprophytic, so I'm pretty sure that this one can be cultivated. And it starts to produce around this time of year in abundance, and it's super tasty and definitely underlooked. I think a lot more people should start playing around with this. And again, maybe you are the one that will figure out how to get these cultivated and, claim a space amongst the mycologists that have been innovating forever, innovating for years and years and years. So I definitely encourage people to do the research and play around with various mushrooms and see if we can't grow these out. I mean, they're delicious. They taste exactly like skirt steak. Chaga, doesn't grow as abundantly here in Pennsylvania. It does grow in Pennsylvania, but not as abundantly. So I don't really recommend the harvesting of it here because this is not a mushroom and it doesn't grow like a mushroom. It is a part of a fungal body. It's like fungally diseased wood. And it's incredible antioxidant, but when it in the more northern areas up in Canada, it produces more abundantly. And that's where more people are harvesting. But in areas where it's not producing as abundantly, I don't recommend pulling as much because it might not come back as readily. We have Ganoderma Sessile. This one actually can be cultivated, but it is very hard and takes a long time to cultivate. But there's an abundance of it just due to the woolly adelgid damage on the hemlock trees in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. There's an incredible abundance of Ganoderma Sessile. We have Lactifluus mushrooms, Lactifluus corugus and Lactifluus velimus, super delicious, milky mushrooms. And again, food forest individuals or people with land definitely plant trees that would encourage mycorrhizal associations like these. Lactarius Deliciosis, super amazing Lactarius mushroom. I only found these in New York. And then porcinis, beautiful porcinis. Depending on where you are, there are different varieties of Edulis clade, Boletus edulis clade porcini mushrooms. And again, plant those trees, Here we have Tricholoma magnivelare. This is the matsutake found out in the Pacific Northwest. And there is also a matsutake that is found in the New England states. So yeah, this one is a rare and delectable mushroom. Not many people come across this mushroom unless you live in those areas and know where to search for them. So yeah, a big part of mycosymbiosis is the actual consumption of mushrooms, mycophagy. There's a really cool video put out by Edible Mountain that we did on making chanterelle ice cream, that you can see here. Um, this is from my friend Rusty, some grilled shiitake with garden veggies, fried oyster mushrooms, mushroom toast. Everybody loves their avocado toast, so I really recommend trying mushroom toast with garden tomatoes and basil and a little bit of cheese. That's amazing there. Some sourdough. Various mushroom extracts. We've been doing concentrated extracts for the past couple years and incorporating them into food as medicine products. I think it is a potentiator. A lot of times we leave the solvent, which is the alcohol, um, in our tinctures, which is cool for preservation, but there are also other different foods that we can utilize to help preserve our extract. So really interesting things to play around with there, like honey. So yeah, there's a lot of innovations. Last year I made this bowl out of mycelium and hemp, nice little fruit bowl that I baked it after it was done growing, so it died and stayed in that form, and super durable. I did some experiments letting it out in the rain and like in various weather changes, and it actually maintained very well. And I'm a big time cordyceps guy, and you can follow my work or check out YouTube or follow on Instagram to see all sorts of other things about cordyceps. So I'm kind of going to just slide through here because I've been talking for quite some time. But yeah, I've been working on a lot of genetic research, mostly for breeding cordyceps mushrooms. But I actually just did get a nanopore sequencer so I can do genome sequencing in my lab now. And there's a lot of field genomics that I was hoping I could do this year, but there was a lot of transitions in my personal life this year, so I wasn't able to get as much of that work done as I would have liked to. But there's a lot more work to be done. These are some pictures from MycoFest last year, which is the mushroom festival that I've been hosting for the past 5 years. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do it this year, and I didn't necessarily want to do a virtual event. But definitely keep an eye out and follow MycoFest online for next year. So yeah, this has just been a little dive into what mycosymbiosis is for me. It may be something else for you, but cultivating mushrooms and working with wild mushrooms is how I personally connect and develop a symbiotic relationship with the fungal life around me. I will be working on more field genomics work, so if anybody wants to donate at my PayPal, paypal.me/mycosymbiotics, any donations that go there will go towards lab equipment so that I can continue with genomic work. Is where I want to direct a lot of my mycological studies moving forward. So yeah, thanks guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and as always, propagate and myceliate.
Wow, what an amazing presentation. Wilfredia Brown, thank you so much.
My
What
pleasure.
a wealth of knowledge there. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I hope that folks that are here tuned in got all the screenshots. But if you need some more information, if you missed anything, just put it in the chat. And yeah, go ahead, Robin, take it away.
Well, I really I want to ask you about like your larger vision of mycosymbiosis and like what's your wildest dream of like people making relationships with fungi and changing the world.
Um, I think that as people develop a better understanding of fungi and what they're doing in the environment, um, to the point that then have an understanding of the patterns of their way of life, that we could use skills and tools like permaculture to implement some of those patterns into the way that we're living and kind of like design the flow of our home, like the way that mycelium moves through the forest, or design our relationships with our family and community in the same way that mycelium develops relationships with the plants, the detritus, the animals, and things like that, to kind of like integrate a more mycelial like archetype over the way that we live, our culture, and um, our social settings. So I think that's a really big one. And then also just bringing more fungi into our day to day. So like more like culturally adapted consumption of mushrooms. So like make it something that's like we are a culture of mycophages. Like we are a culture of individuals that eat a lot of mushrooms, and then wearing mycelium, or like utilizing mycelium as insulation for our homes, utilizing mycelium for wastewater treatment, um, just integrating as much of it into our lives as we can, um, because as we cultivate them and as we work with them, we're benefiting them by propagating them and expanding them into new environments, as well as they're nourishing us and helping us stay healthy, or helping us keep our homes warm, or helping us ensure that what we're wearing isn't damaging the ecosystem, um,
Thank you.
so on and so forth. I mean, the list goes on and on. I just think the more integrated we can get fungi into our lives, the more mycosymbiosis and the better tomorrow will look.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Wait, and to follow that question, could you say more about what it's like to think like fungi? Like what would that experience be?
So again, just going back to like understanding the patterns of fungi and developing a relationship with them, you know, um, and developing communication with them. And that's something that I didn't really understand in my adventures into the natural world. I went to a lot of events and conferences and things like that where people would be talking about talking to plants, and I just didn't understand it because I only understood language as like an auditory thing. But when we understand that humans are more capable of understanding symbolic language than auditory language, then we can really start to develop a dialogue with these mushrooms. And personally, I've developed a very intimate dialogue with cordyceps mushrooms, and it might be different for everybody. Maybe just start with one mushroom that you want to develop a dialogue with, maybe oyster mushrooms, because there's something so abundant and so readily available, and just take the time to see life from their perspective. Like, what are they doing? Compounds are they producing? Like, why are they producing those compounds? Is it due to a relationship that they have with an animal? Is it due to a relationship that they have with the tree that they're growing on? And yeah, just kind of slowly try to understand life from their perspective, and then from there, I feel that they start to communicate with you, and once you take the time enough to understand them and understand where they're coming from, they'll definitely start to communicate with you, and then from that point, you can really just like you go out in the forest and you're like, they're looking tasty, you know what I mean? And like I want to decompose that. I want to make sure that that turns into soil. I want to make sure that that is converted into protein and beneficial compounds. Like, I mean, the fact that like we can take a log and introduce a species of fungi, and then turn that mass of lignin and cellulose into an array of medicinal compounds is like completely amazing. So yeah, I mean, I hope it answers that question, but I really think it's important to develop a dialogue with maybe one type of fungi to begin with, and then a broadened selection, and then you can kind of see life from their perspective, which really takes a lot of like dissolution of self, um, dissolution of what you believe life to be. Because when you start to see life from the perspective of a fungi, it's not like anything like life from the perspective of a human being.
And you hinted that actually in your talk when you're showing the slide from your studio and or from your lab, and you said, this is my lab, but actually there's really no room for my in this selfless system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the cordyceps lab. You know what I mean? Like that's like all I am is one potential of collective consciousness. All I am is one potential of a collective species that's part of a greater planet, that's part of a greater universe, that's part of a omniversal evolution, you know? So like anything that I do, and just like even saying I, like it just, you know, it's part of a collective, you know? So like, I mean, just to simplify that, like that lab is for the cordyceps. That lab is for propagation of the cordyceps. That lab is for every single person that receives a culture from that it was created in there. You know, like that lab is for all of the potentials of information that comes out and affects anybody. You know, so it's not just mine. You know, and I think, I mean, it flux in and out of that. Like there's times where I have like hard ego, like I am this character. You know what I mean? So it's definitely like, especially within the culture that we live in, it's not something that's like highly supported to like dissolve your self identity. But beyond the character that you're playing, beyond that like superficial self identity, there is what I believe is the I am, like the true essence of you, which is, yeah, just like I said, hard to hold on to sometimes within the culture that we live in and hard to even understand. But I definitely encourage individuals to, you know, meditate, get out into nature, and like realize that you are part of this ever living evolution or everlasting evolution that goes beyond our planet.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I got some comments from the
sure.
chat. Killer work, William. Wanted to relay the message. Dude, super deep perspective and awareness. Love it. I want to ask some actual questions now. Let's see. I've heard a lot on the wood substrate being important in the digestibility or the risk for tummy trouble from mushrooms. Does this hold water? Do you avoid mushrooms growing on certain trees?
Cherry trees, you know, just I think it's cherry trees that has like some level of arsenic or something like that in the wood.
Okay, good
but
to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I might be wrong on that. There is a tree that has like arsenic or something along those lines, and like somebody in Maryland, I think, did a test on the maitake that was found growing on a cherry tree or something. But like, don't quote me on that. I don't know if that's the specific tree, but they did find some undesirable heavy metal or some undesirable compound in the mushroom. So I don't usually pick mushrooms that are growing on the side of the road just because like in an urban area, because like dogs pee on those trees and stuff like that, unless the mushrooms are like higher up. And then I don't eat mushrooms out of New York City or other like densely populated cities, just due to the contamination in the soils there. But otherwise, you know, it's you're pretty much good to go.
Okay, good to know. Someone's asking about mycocylindrics and using mushrooms to classify time.
What? I have never heard of that in my life. Like calendar, like chronology.
Yeah,
mycocylindrics, using mushrooms to classify time.
I mean, we were kind of talking about that like during the presentation, just us like when I go to different mushroom clubs, there's older mushroom enthusiasts that talk about mushrooms that they only saw for a period of time in like the 70s or in the 80s.
Oh, right.
Like, there is a progression of time in the progression of the ecosystem when different mushrooms will show themselves. And then just like seasonal, you know, like if I was just thrown into some altered time space of this reality, didn't know when or where, like, or what I was, like if I was thrown back in the past or something and there was no watches or calendars or anything like that to look at, if I could see that there was like chanterelles growing, I'd be like, oh, it's summertime or like whatever, you know.
Sure.
Just depending on species. But honestly, that's something I've never heard of before. So I don't know if I could really answer that question.
Sure. Yeah. The idea of symbiotic language is interesting. Can you recommend some reading around this idea of developing a relationship with mushrooms or other parts of nature?
Symbolic language.
Symbolic. Oh, I don't know. I'm just reading the chat.
Honestly, I've not read.
Symbiotic.
Symbiotic.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thanks for the help.
hold up. I haven't read anything particularly on
But also coming from Lexi, how can we support the learning of understudied species and their medicinal properties?
That's something that I'm really focused on right now. I'm actually going to be going out to Denver to meet up with some individuals that are opening a lab there that has a lot of analytical potential. Because I really want to study some understudied species for their medicinal potential. And we could start off by doing analytical research and seeing if it has any compounds, medicinal compounds that are similar or the same as other mushrooms. And then from there, work on discovering any novel compounds that it's holding. And then from there, it takes a significant amount of money to do clinical studies or somewhat clinical studies to see what that compound actually does. But I'm really excited to get into work like this. And that's something that I see myself doing over the next 10 years.
Word.
And as far as the symbolic stuff, I've not read anything about that. That's something that that's an idea and a thought that came to me in psychedelic experiences, and I've not read anything about it. It's just an idea that I've been developing on. But I listened to this podcast a couple weeks ago called The Ecology of Perception, and it was an interview with David Abram on Emergence Magazine, and they hit on topics that are similar, and I think that's a really good bit to listen to.
I'm going to put that in the chat for anyone that needs it. Cool. Is there any other points you wanted to touch on?
How did you begin cultivating? When did that first happen for you? What was that relationship?
When I was 18, I started like eating magic mushrooms, and everybody always used to say like, eat the dust out of the bottom of the bag. It's the best part. And I looked it up on the internet because I was always researching things that I was doing. And I found out that a lot of mushroom cultivators don't cut the substrate off the bottom of their mushrooms, which is most of the time manure. And that really like grossed me out. So I was like, maybe I should just grow my own mushrooms if I want to eat them. Not saying that I did that, but just my researching into doing that helped me to develop an understanding of mushroom cultivation, which I then translated into gourmet and medicinal mushroom cultivation. And then from there, it was just, I took a class with Fungi for the People out in Oregon. And then I took a couple, I listened to a couple talks from Trad Cotter and just watched a bunch of stuff on YouTube and started doing it myself and learning as I went.
Yeah. I remember you saying in another talk that you graduated from YouTube University.
Indeed, I did.
Yeah. That's why he calls himself a professional nerd. Love that. There's another question. It's not in a full sentence, so I don't know the context, but maybe you'll get it. Myco elements, fire, water, gold.
Maybe hitting on some like alchemy right there.
Right.
But I'm not entirely sure how to respond to that.
Sure. Well, if you got any more, you viewers out there in TV land, Mushroom City Arts land, a few more minutes left on the live chat. If you got any more questions while we have William Padilla Brown, the rock star of his field. And just following this right after we finish with interviewing Will, get to hear his music.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you. What's your favorite mushroom?
Cordyceps militaris.
I already knew that. Yep. And it's really interesting. You're actually, one of your videos from, was it last year or 2 years ago, is embedded on the Mushroom City Art Festival page. And it talks about how they grow out of the heads of cricket.
Ants.
Ants.
Oh, well, I don't know.
No. It's a different bug.
Oh.
But one of those.
Moth people or something like that.
Yeah. And I was like, what? That's so cool. And also,
I had those crazy glasses on and that crazy shirt.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're saying how it grows out of their heads, and it's like those parasitic mushrooms that grow out of bugs, which is so cool. And also cordyceps, they add more oxygen intake.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is so cool. And so so a lot of times we associate like foraging like wood on trees, right?
Yeah.
But this, you were taking it a level deeper and understanding bugs. These are coming from the bugs, so not necessarily trees.
Yeah, lots of love there.
Yeah. All right, I got a couple more comments that come in. So I have oh goodness, I don't know how to say this word. Bear with me. Umbelletta spot. and I cleanly cultured some tissues back in April on agar.
Mhm.
Looks to be running strong now. What's the best way to genetically confirm? Lab procedures were clean, sterile, but I know this is a holy grail to get running. Happy to share with anyone that wants to play with it.
If they want to shoot me a DM at MycoSymbiote on Instagram and send me a culture of that, I can do DNA extraction and amplification, and then send that in for sequencing and confirm whether or not that's the species that they believe it is. And then
Cool.
I'd be happy to just be able to have that culture as well if it is.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put up the information for people to contact you for sure. Coming soon. What else? Oh, are the places where decrim is happening cultivating diverse species of psychoactive mushrooms? And is that going to be a thing as the legal landscape changes?
Well, right now, decriminalization doesn't cover cultivation, but I do know in Denver that there are a lot of people that are cultivating psychoactive mushrooms now that it's been decriminalized. And so far it's been good, as long as they're not selling their mushrooms, then they've been fine. So hopefully we start to see a little bit of protection for cultivators, which would be pretty cool. But we have a long road ahead of us, but I'm just excited that this is something that's being talked about and taken seriously.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, plant medicine. Do the mushrooms sing mushroom music?
Yeah.
What?
Like there's this one guy that makes like symphonies for like each mushroom, like out in Europe somewhere. But also if you tap into their firing of neurons through the mycelium, you can kind of turn that into a beat of sorts.
Wow.
Whoa, super cool. I'm learning so much. Thank you. So exciting. Okay, got a couple more coming in. I'm really interested in mycophagy with medicinal mushrooms, like Will mentioned. Where can we learn more about recipes or virtual workshops? Like butter and honey infusions.
Check out Eugenia Bone. She's done some cool cooking stuff.
Making music.
Yeah, that's usually how I start making songs anyways. But
right?
I don't know. It took a lot of experimentation to be able to learn these kinds of things, and like a lot of working with different scientists to figure out the best extraction methods and things like that. So there are some things that I know, and like usually I'm very readily sharing information, but I helped start a business called Cognitive Function that has like a lot of proprietary methods of doing those kinds of things. Sure. So I don't usually talk about that. And it sucks because I'm a teacher and I love sharing information, but I would just recommend like playing with things yourself and seeing what works, and I do think at some point in time we'll be able to collect all this information that we learned about different and infusions and things like that and release it to the public. But just right now, due to business ties, I don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about that.
Sure. Got another one for you. Have you seen at all if mushrooms respond positively to specific types of music like plants do?
There's been a lot of research on that. And I think some people have found some good results. I mean, definitely look it up online. I just play like OD trap music and like electronic music for my mushrooms, and they seem to enjoy it. They like the bass.
Word. I'm gonna remember that.
Like the deep bass, like it's part of the reason why they sprout when a tree falls down, or why they
right, the big
like
boom.
Like the thunderbolts, not just the electric shock, but also the clap, the noise, the bass. They really like the bass.
Wow.
I can't wait to see a meme of how they like the bass and seeing all these mushrooms get down. I can't wait for it.
Somebody makes it.
Right on. Cool. Well, Will, thank you.
Yeah.
The rock star of the field.
Yeah, come out. Oh, well, I don't know if you said my foray is all filled up tomorrow, right?
Oh my God, yeah. So we're having forays at Lincoln Park in Baltimore tomorrow.
Yeah.
We still have a few openings available, but not for Will.
Yeah, well, the
He's
documentary
booked.
crews will be out there, and we'll probably be hanging out for a little bit while we're out there. So definitely come say what's up, even if you're not going to come on the foray.
Yeah, yeah.
Dude,
Yeah.
awesome. Cool information.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Amazing. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
See you tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you, Will. Bye-bye.